Welcome back to Farmyard Care, my friends, the place where we dig into the old wisdom of farming, backyard gardening, homesteading, soil building, and simple animal care, so you can use those lessons in your own yard, coop, or small farm today. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever stepped into a feed store, looked at the price of a bag of chicken grain, and felt your stomach drop a little? You grab that heavy 50-pound bag, carry it to the truck, bring it home, pour it out with care, and then watch your hens scratch half of it into the dirt like they are decorating the coop floor. If you raise chickens, grow vegetables, compost kitchen scraps, keep a small garden, or dream of making your homestead more self-sufficient, you know exactly how frustrating that feels. Every dollar matters. Every bucket of feed matters. And when prices keep climbing, it can start to feel like your flock is no longer feeding your family. Your family is working just to feed the flock. For years, many backyard chicken keepers have been taught one simple idea. If you do not buy commercial grain, your chickens will not stay healthy, lay well, or survive. But is that really true? Or have we simply forgotten how chickens were fed before shiny bags of pellets became the normal answer to every problem? Because here is the truth. Chickens were never designed to live only on store-bought feed. They are scratchers, foragers, bug hunters, compost turners, weed eaters, and natural recyclers. And on traditional farms, especially in Amish country, chickens are not treated like expensive pets that constantly drain the budget. They are part of a living system. Today we are going to explore the Amish method that feeds chickens without store-bought grain for as little as $1 a week. This method is not about fancy equipment, complicated formulas, or expensive supplements. It is about using what you already have: kitchen scraps, garden waste, insects, fermented grains, compost, winter crops, dairy byproducts, straw, and smart seasonal planning. In this video, I will walk you through 7 practical steps that can help turn your flock from a costly backyard habit into a productive, self-sustaining part of your home, garden, and farmyard. So grab a cup of coffee, stay with me until the end, and if you love practical farming wisdom like this, make sure to subscribe to Farmyard Care, because this may completely change the way you feed your chickens. Section 1. The Kitchen Scrap Revolution, Turning Trash to Treasure. Let's begin with the feed source many people throw away before the day even starts: kitchen scraps. In most homes, vegetable peels, leftover rice, cold oatmeal, stale bread, pasta, and small dinner scraps go straight into the trash, as if their value is already gone. But to a practical farm family, and especially in the Amish way of thinking, that scrap bucket is not waste. It is energy, minerals, savings, and future eggs. A normal household can throw away 4 to 6 pounds of food scraps in a week. For a small flock of 10 to 15 chickens, that is enough to make a real difference. So while you may be buying feed at the store, you might also be tossing usable chicken food into the garbage without realizing it. Here is something many new chicken keepers miss. Hens often handle cooked starches better than raw ones. Leftover rice, plain pasta, cooked oatmeal, or old bread can give your birds a useful boost of energy and help stretch every bag of feed further. Of course, scraps should be offered wisely, not as moldy junk, but as clean leftovers that still have value. Then comes protein and calcium. Chickens are not strict vegetarians. They are natural omnivores, built to scratch for worms, insects, larvae, and bits of animal protein. Traditional farmers saved small meat scraps and bones, cooked them down until soft, and gave those nutrient-rich remains back to the flock. For strong eggshells, they dried used eggshells, crushed them fine, and fed them back to the hens, letting the chickens recycle their own packaging. So before you empty that kitchen bucket, stop for a second. Are you looking at trash, or are you looking at the raw material for tomorrow morning's breakfast? Topic: the magic of fermentation, unlocking hidden nutrition. And once you understand the value of scraps, the next question is this: how do you make cheap grain work harder when you still need a little extra feed? This is where the Amish method becomes even smarter, because one of their quiet secrets is fermentation. Fermentation is not complicated. It is the same natural process that turns cabbage into sauerkraut and flour into sourdough. You take basic grain, cover it with clean water, and let time and beneficial bacteria do the work. Here is the simple science. Raw grain contains phytic acid, a compound that can bind up minerals like zinc, iron, and calcium. Think of it like a lock around the nutrients. The grain may contain good things, but your chickens cannot always absorb them well. When the grain sits in water for 3 to 4 days, fermentation helps break that lock open. The result is feed that is softer, swollen, easier to digest, and more useful to the bird's body. The hens feel full sooner, but they are also getting more value from each bite. A good batch should smell pleasantly sour, like sourdough bread or a healthy ferment, not rotten or foul. This is why fermented grain can make a bag of basic feed last much longer. Less nutrition passes through unused, the gut receives natural probiotics, and the flock often looks healthier and more active. You are not simply feeding more, you are feeding smarter. So now the system begins to take shape. Kitchen scraps reduce waste. Fermented grain unlocks hidden nutrition, and together they move your flock one step closer to becoming part of a self-sustaining farmyard instead of a constant feed store expense. Section 3. The free-range buffet and masterful bug catching. Now that we have talked about scraps and fermented grain, let's step outside the coop and look at one of the strongest free feed sources on any farmyard: bugs. Chickens may look calm in the grass, but they are tiny feathered hunters. Their wild ancestors, the red jungle fowl, survive by scratching through leaves, chasing insects, pecking larvae, and searching the forest floor for anything that moved. The Amish understand this instinct and let the birds use it. A single chicken can eat dozens of insects a day. Grasshoppers, beetles, earwigs, worms, grubs, flies, and moss are not just snacks, they are concentrated protein. While layer feeds contain about 16% protein, insects can be far richer. Every bug your hen catches is one less bite of feed you had to buy. But smart farmers do not simply wait for insects to appear. Some hang a burlap sack soaked in milk near the coop to attract flies and produce larvae. It may sound unpleasant to us, but to chickens, it is a protein station. Others hang a lantern above a bucket of water at night. Moths come toward the light, fall in, and by morning, breakfast is waiting. When chickens forage this way, their diet becomes varied and alive. They scratch, hunt, move, and eat as nature designed them to eat. Keepers see the reward in the eggs: deeper orange yolks, stronger flavor, and nutrients from greens, insects, and natural fats. This is not just feeding chickens. This is letting chickens be chickens. Section 4. Rotational grazing and the compost engine. Once you realize how much food is hiding in the yard, the next step is learning how to move your flock through it without destroying the land. If chickens stay locked in the same dirt pen week after week, they scratch it down to dust. The grass disappears, soil becomes tired, and the birds lose the fresh life they were meant to find. This is why traditional farmers use rotational grazing with a chicken tractor. It is a lightweight, movable coop with an open bottom. Every day or two, you move it onto fresh grass, and your hens have a new salad bar. They nibble weeds like dandelion, plantain, and lamb's quarters, hunt insects, trim growth, and leave manure behind. Instead of fighting weeds with chemicals, chickens turn weeds into eggs. Instead of buying so much fertilizer, you let the flock return fertility to the ground. Land feeds the chickens, and chickens feed the land. The system becomes stronger when compost enters the picture. A good compost pile is full of heat, microbes, worms, grubs, food scraps, and decaying plant matter. To us, it may look like waste. To chickens, it is treasure. Farmer Carl Hammer of Vermont Compost Company became known for raising a large flock on compost piles made from food waste, horse manure, and old hay. As the birds scratched through the piles, they found feed while turning compost. That scratching brings oxygen into the pile, speeds decomposition, and helps turn waste into rich garden material. The loop becomes clear. Scraps feed chickens, chickens create manure, manure activates compost, and compost feeds the garden that feeds the family and flock again. This is where chickens stop being another chore. They become pest controllers, compost turners, fertilizer makers, and soil builders. When you move them with purpose, your farmyard becomes one living system. Section 5. Winter Survival. Growing dedicated crops. Now at this point you may be thinking, that all sounds wonderful when the grass is green, the bugs are everywhere, and the garden is full of life. But what happens when winter arrives, the ground freezes, and the flock can no longer scratch up insects from the soil? That is exactly where many chicken keepers get trapped. Summer feels easy, but when January comes, they panic, drive back to the feed store, and start paying full price again. The Amish think differently. They do not wait until winter to solve a winter problem. They plan for it 6 months earlier, when the soil is warm and the garden is growing. One of the smartest ways to do this is by planting dedicated crops just for the flock. Not fancy crops, not delicate crops. High-yield, storage-friendly, practical crops. A great example is mango beets. These huge roots can grow to an incredible size, sometimes reaching many pounds per root. In the fall, they are harvested and stored in a cool cellar or protected shed. Then, when winter is at its hardest, one beet can be rolled into the coop like an edible toy. The chickens peck at it, scratch around it, and slowly work it down over several days. Sunflowers are another simple powerhouse. You can plant them along fence lines, edges, and unused corners of the garden. When the seed heads mature, cut them, dry them, and hang them whole in the coop. The hens will pick out the seeds themselves, getting fat, energy, and entertainment at the same time. Then come crops like comfrey and winter squash. Comfrey grows back year after year, and its dried leaves can provide valuable nutrition. Winter squash stores beautifully through the cold months and gives your flock a natural source of energy when fresh forage is gone. This is the real lesson. Winter feed is not bought in winter. It is grown in spring and summer. A small garden patch, even one smaller than a living room, can produce a surprising amount of chicken feed and keep hundreds of dollars in your pocket. But even with root crops, squash, sunflower heads, and stored greens, there is still one challenge in the coldest part of winter: protein. When the insects disappear and the ground is locked under frost, chickens lose one of their richest natural food sources. This is where the Amish method brings in something many modern chicken keepers overlook: dairy. On many Amish farms, milk is already part of daily life. They have cows, they make butter, they make cheese, and they often have extra milk, whey, or naturally soured milk available. Instead of wasting it, they give it to the hens, and chickens love it. One traditional favorite is clabbered milk, which is raw milk that has naturally soured and thickened. To the flock, it is not spoiled waste. It is a rich, fermented food full of easy-to-digest protein and beneficial bacteria. Poured into shallow pans, it becomes a winter supplement that helps replace some of what insects would normally provide. Old farmers used to talk about milk-fed chickens, and many believe those birds produced richer eggs with deeper golden yolks. Just a small amount of dairy can make a noticeable difference, especially when the rest of the winter diet is made up of roots, grains, stored crops, and scraps. Now, most backyard chicken keepers do not have a dairy cow behind the house, but that does not mean this idea is out of reach. Local dairy farms, small cheese makers, and homestead neighbors sometimes have extra whey or dairy byproducts they do not need. For them, it may be waste. For your flock, it can be a valuable protein source. That is the beauty of this system. One person's excess becomes another animal's nourishment. The farmer reduces waste, the chickens get stronger winter nutrition, and your feed bill drops again. Section 7. Deep litter and straw bale insulation. Heating for free. Now, feeding your chickens through winter is only one part of the challenge. The other part is keeping them warm, dry, and protected when the weather turns rough. And here is something many new chicken keepers misunderstand. Cold alone is usually not what harms a healthy flock. Chickens can handle cold better than many people think. The real danger comes from wind, damp bedding, poor ventilation, and moisture that leads to frostbite. So how do you keep a coop warm without expensive electricity, risky heat lamps, or a monthly power bill? The Amish answer is simple, practical, and surprisingly powerful. Work with natural decomposition instead of fighting against it. This is where the deep litter method comes in. Instead of completely cleaning the coop every few days, you begin in the fall by adding fresh straw, wood shavings, or dry bedding over the droppings. Then, as the weeks pass, you keep adding clean layers on top. By the time winter settles in, the floor has built up into a thick bedding pack, often close to a foot deep. Down at the bottom, the older material slowly begins to break down. Microbes go to work. The bedding, manure, and natural moisture begin a gentle composting process, and that process creates heat. In many coops, this can make the inside feel noticeably warmer than the outside air. At the same time, the chickens scratch through the upper layers, helping keep the bedding loose and aerated, which reduces ammonia and keeps the floor healthier. But heat is not enough if icy wind is cutting through the walls. That is why Amish farmers often stack straw bales around the outside of the coop. Straw bales act like a natural windbreak and insulation wall. They block drafts, absorb extra moisture, and help the coop stay dry, which is one of the most important things for winter chicken health. So instead of using electric heaters, the system uses bedding, straw, microbes, and chicken behavior. The flock stays warmer, the coop stays drier, and when spring comes, that deep litter becomes a rich material for the compost pile or garden beds. What protected your chickens in winter can help feed your soil in spring. Conclusion: the mindset shift. So now you can see the bigger picture. The Amish method is not just a list of clever tricks to save a few dollars on chicken feed. It is a completely different way of looking at the farmyard. Instead of seeing scraps as trash, weeds as a problem, insects as pests, manure as waste, and straw as simple bedding, this system connects everything together. Your kitchen scraps help feed the chickens. Your garden weeds become forage. Your chickens hunt insects, turn compost, produce eggs, and leave behind nitrogen-rich manure. That manure helps warm the coop in winter, powers the compost pile, and eventually feeds the soil that grows more crops for your family and your flock. That is the real secret. A strong homestead is not built by buying an answer for every problem. It is built by understanding how each part of the system can support the next part. When you begin thinking this way, you are no longer completely dependent on rising feed prices, supply chain problems, or whatever the feed store charges next month. You become more resilient. You become more observant. You start asking better questions. What can my garden grow for the flock? What can my flock return to the garden? What am I throwing away that could actually be feeding the system? And that is where self-sufficiency begins. Not with perfection, not with hundreds of acres, but with small, practical changes repeated season after season. So tell me, are you ready to stop throwing away useful chicken feed? Are you ready to let your flock scratch, forage, recycle, fertilize, and live more like chickens were meant to live? If this video helped you see your chickens and your farmyard in a new way, hit the like button, share it with another chicken keeper, and subscribe to Farmyard Care for more practical lessons in sustainable, self-sufficient living. And before you go, leave a comment below. Which of these 7 methods would you try first? Until next time, keep your hands in the dirt, keep your flock healthy, and take good care of your farmyard.